Good Erev Shabbos, Pashas Tazriya מצורע, in the middle of the Sfiros העומר, as you can tell. It's pretty incredible the connection between last week's Parsha, Parsha Shmini, and this week's Parsha of Tazriya מצורע. Last week's Parsha, Parsha Shmini, takes us from the pinnacle of Kedusha and Tahara with the anointment of the Kohen Gadol and the Kohanim with their vestments and the Shemen HaMishcha, and takes us from there, from on one hand the peak of Tahara and Kedusha, and on the other hand to Tumah, and takes us to the level of Tumas Haguf, which transpires by eating treif. We learned last week, Al Tishaksu es nafshay seichem b'chol hasheret hashoretz v'lo sitamu bohem v'nitmeisem bom, which means that by eating treif, what happens is a person becomes contaminated through them, if we can understand that level of contamination. And then the pasuk says, Ki ani Hashem Elikechem v'skadashtem, and you should be holy, you should sanctify yourselves. V'yisem kedoshim ki kodesh ani, and we're meant to emulate the ways of Hashem, and Hashem is holy, and therefore, we should not become tomei in our nefesh. So, in last week's parsha in Shmini, we learned the concept of tomei lenefesh, or what's called timtum alev, by a person eating something which is tomei, he actually is metame his lave, which causes him achshavli zorois and all types of other negative thoughts, all by the fact that he puts into his mouth something that is tomei. In this week's parsha of Tazriya מצורע, we learn about the מצorע, which we all know is a nega that is a spiritual nega. It's a spiritual, if you will, growth on the human body or in the house that comes from a person who speaks Lashon Hara. So, on the other hand, what's happening here in this week's parsha is the same way that a person in Shmini could be metame his lave and being metame his guf by imbibing something, by taking it into his mouth. This week we learn about that what comes out of our mouth is even more important potentially than what goes into our mouth. Why? If a person is metame himself by eating something, he's got tumtum alev. He's going to have machshava zaris. But if a person is metame himself by what goes out of his mouth, what is the solution? Well, we know he has to bring two birds of any type, and it's not a carbon, he can bring two of any birds. It doesn't have to be a turtle dove. And then he has to bring eitz ezov. Why the ezov? Eitz erez. Why the eitz erez? The eitz erez is a very tall tree. It's a cedar wood. It's a tree which seems to be impervious, which is representative of the human being's gaiva, the human being's haughtiness. And on the other hand, he also has to bring the shni talas, which is a red crimson little string, which comes from a very little animal, a snail, which is the lowliest of creatures, to teach us humbleness, to teach us anova. And a person also has to bring that with the azov, which is the hyssop, which is a lowly bush, again to teach us the humbleness, that if we are full of gaiva, and if we're full of ourselves, and we think we're the most important person, and everybody is nothing, then it's very easy to come to the level of Einos Dvorim and Lashon Hara. It's very easy to come to speak about other people, because after all, we're much better than them. After all, we think that we're the best. We know everything. We have experience. We have knowledge. What do they know? What do they know? They're young. They don't know. And therefore we come to insult them, or we come to speak slanderously about them to somebody else. So the Yetzer Hara brings us to a level because of who we think we are. Because we don't have HaKadosh Baruch Hu in front of us at every time that we speak, and we're not thinking about that we're all the Rabbeinu Shalom's children. And if we speak negatively about one other person, he's also a son of Hashem, even though he's not my son, or he may be my son, or even though he's not my brother, or he may be my brother. Nevertheless, he's a son of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bonim lamakoim. I once heard Rabbi Pesach Krohn give a beautiful story and say, the Rabbeinu Shalom says, if you don't have a brother, then I don't have a son. We have to care about each other as brothers. So the Yetzer Hara to speak Lashon Hara, and even worse, the Yetzer Hara to speak Einos Dvorim, to say to somebody something which is hurtful, something which puts them down, something which denigrates them. something which God forbid makes them feel like a snail, brings us to the level of Badod Yoshev, that we have to sit outside of the camp for 7 days. Careful with kashrus, on Kamalei Nima, checking vegetables, and all the checking that we do of hashkachas to prevent ourselves from getting timtum alev. Let's be even more careful with how we speak to somebody else, which causes einos dvarim, which is terrible pain, sleepless nights, aggravation, misery, suffering, all because we can't bring ourselves to say something nice to somebody, to say a compliment to somebody, to say a thank you to somebody. Why? Because we think of ourselves that we're the best. And I believe, Be'ezus Hashem, that if we can all work on ourselves to fix this, just as kashrus gets rid of the timtum alev, so too will being shomer piv u'lushoinoi, as the Chavetz Chaim has taught us, to have a machzim lepiv, will prevent us from being over on einos dvarim and lashon hara. Have a wonderful Shabbos and a good chodesh. Iyar is ani Hashem roifecha. May it taka be Bekarv Mamish, that all the Cholim have a refuah shalema, and all of Klal Yisrael be zocha to the Gula Krovai b'Meher v'Yameinu.